Hi, Arcfieldweather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Monday morning, December 18th. A lot to talk about this morning. Still dealing with the effects of a powerful storm system in the Mid-Atlantic region, northeast U.S. That storm pushes northward today into the eastern part of Canada by early tonight. Rain is winding down across eastern Pennsylvania. Still some heavy rain early today across the New York City metro region. Certainly it'll be heavy throughout the day across New England and New York State, eastern New York State as well. Winds are increasing out of the northwest on the backside of this departing storm system, and they can gust up to 50 miles per hour or so in D.C., Philadelphia, and later in the day in New York City. Unfortunately, that can result in some downed tree limbs and maybe some scattered power outages as well. No cold air to speak of right now across the northeastern part of the nation, so all in the form of rain. But much colder air pours in later today and tonight into the day on Tuesday, and there certainly can be some accumulating snow just downstream of the Great Lakes, places like West Virginia, western Pennsylvania, western New York State certainly can get some accumulating snow later on today, tonight, and on Tuesday. Here's the latest radar loop from WSI's Intellicast.com. Again, no cold air to speak of, all in the form of rain, winding down now across eastern Pennsylvania. Still some heavy rain for the next few hours across New York City, and kind of an all-day rain event, much of New York State and New England. And then colder air pours in behind it. Strong northwest winds. Already northwest winds in D.C. and Philadelphia now. Again, they can gust up to 50 miles per hour or so over the next several hours. Just downstream of Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, accumulating snow on the order of a few to maybe even several inches possible later today, tonight, into the day on Tuesday. Can even be some snow showers that make their way all the way across the mountains into east of the Appalachians, let's say into eastern Pennsylvania during the day on Tuesday. But again, still feeling the effects of this powerful storm system that is now pushing northward towards eastern Canada. Well, I want to kind of shift gears right now and talk about a pattern change that looks like it's evolving for next week. It's kind of the timing that we expected, the latter part of December, evolving into a more of a colder pattern for the southern and eastern states, likely a snowier pattern as well. We haven't really had much snow to speak of across much of the eastern part of Pennsylvania, but a big-time change is occurring in the upper part of the atmosphere. We'll go through that here with a couple different models. This is the ensemble run of the European model. We're looking at 500 millibar height anomalies across all of North America. This is a 0Z run last night. We start off the day here on Monday morning, December 18th, with very strong upper level ridge. That's depicted here by the orange color, higher heights than normal. Here's a trough system associated with this powerhouse storm system, still impacting the northeastern part of the country. Kind of a southern wave and a northern wave that coalesce together to result in this strong storm system and a ridge as we start off the week out across the western U.S. But we'll going to walk through quickly the next several days, and again, intense high pressure, higher heights than normal south of Greenland over the northwestern part of the Atlantic over the next couple of days. But watch what happens as we evolve into next week, Christmas week. And here we are now later this week. This is now all the way into Friday morning. Ridging dominates much of Canada and much of the U.S. by the time we get into the latter part of the week, into the upcoming weekend. A chilly few days for the Mid-Atlantic region, but overall relatively quiet pattern and certainly above normal temperatures across Canada later this week into the upcoming weekend. Now, notice the position of this upper level ridge by the time we get to the early part of the weekend. It tends to then retrograde back to the west here and tends to strengthen over the central and western part of Canada here. Now this is all the way out to a week from tomorrow, next Tuesday the 26th. Some important changes here. Remember, we had this very strong upper level ridge popping up here over the next couple of days. Northern Atlantic, northwestern Atlantic. Again, it kind of, the overall pattern tends to retrograde back to the west here across Canada. And here we go all the way now into the middle part of next week. Quite a different story here. This, let me draw something right here. This is really, think of this as a strong high setting up right here west of Hudson Bay. This is the Hudson Bay region of Canada right here, the Hudson Bay actually, and high in this position in the upper part of the atmosphere certainly can allow for cold air masses to drop southward from Canada into the central and eastern U.S. And notice, you're kind of a connection with this trough system, the one over the Atlantic, and now this developing one over the southern part of the U.S. Remember, El Nino winter, we have this active southern branch of the jet stream. You can envision low pressures moving across us. Now, let's go a little bit farther in time into the latter part of next week. And here we go now. This is a week and a half away from right now, next Thursday, December 28th. And again, big time pattern changes. Another thing to note is we have had to deal with a ridge in the southeastern states during the past couple of winters, more typical of a La Nina winter. That is certainly not in evidence right now, and nor in evidence for any time in the foreseeable future. But here we go. Trough kind of establishing itself over the southern and eastern U.S. Again, a colder pattern setting up for the southern and eastern U.S., blocking over the western part of Canada. And this is also kind of an important feature here as well, this ridging popping up across the interior west all the way up into Canada. Again, high pressure here allows for an influx of colder air masses from Canada into the central and eastern U.S. Here's your active southern branch of the jet stream. Just envision low pressure areas moving along this trough with that cold air coming in from the north and west. We certainly can be setting up for snow threats in the eastern and even the southern part of the U.S. Go out a little farther in time now. Will this evolving pattern be sustained in the southern and eastern U.S. with that colder weather pattern? We'll go out a few more days here, and indeed there are signs, and we'll talk about some teleconnection indices in a moment. This is now all the way out to the end of December, Saturday, December 30th. Still trough over the eastern U.S., still high pressure blocking over the central and western part of Canada, another trough over the centered over the Aleutian Islands, and again a little ridge right here in the interior west. So certainly this looks like it can have some sustainability, and we'll take a look at the some of the teleconnection indices in a moment here that support the idea that once we have this pattern change set up next week to a colder one for the southern and eastern U.S., it very well could stick around for a while. Well, let's take a look at the GFS ensemble run from last night, just to show that indeed there's support amongst other computer forecast models for this pattern change. Again, we're looking at 500 millibar height anomalies. Now we'll push forward quickly here, and again, similar to the European ensemble run, very, very strong ridging over the North Atlantic over the next couple of days. And again, this strong area of upper level ridging retrogrades back to central and western Canada by the time we get to the latter part of next week, which is an important change. At the same time, troughiness develops over the southeastern states. Here we are now into the upcoming weekend, and here's that area to watch right here over the eastern half of Canada later in the weekend. But again, like the ensemble run of the European model, this tends to retrograde back to the Hudson Bay region of Canada and even a little bit farther to the west than that by the time we get into the latter part of next week. Here we are all the way out into Saturday, December 30th, and high pressure ridging centered over the central part of Canada. This is Hudson Bay of Canada, and look at that trough right here over the southern and eastern U.S. Again, this will lead to a stormy pattern taking that southern route here. Colder air can come in from Canada into the central and eastern U.S. and similar to the European ensemble run trough also out there over the Aleutian Islands with a little bit of ridging here in the interior western U.S. Now, before we take a look at some teleconnection indices, let's take a look at the 850 millibar temperature anomalies. This is using the ensemble run of the GFS, and we'll kind of quickly go through this. And again, with that trough setting up later next week in the southern and eastern U.S., look for colder than normal conditions to develop. Here we are now, the end of this work week, this Friday, very mild relative to normal up across Canada. Still cold, but relative to normal, warmer than normal temperatures here, and that extends all the way into much of the U.S. late this week. Now, we move forward here, and again, keep it in mind the development of that upper level ridge over the Hudson Bay region of Canada, even according to the European model, a little west of there, the western part of Canada. Here we are now in the middle of next week, and starting to see some colder than normal conditions here setting up in the southeastern part of the nation. Again, that high pressure ridging really intense over the next few days over the North Atlantic, retrogrades all the way back to Hudson Bay, maybe even west of there by later in that next week. This is December 29th, and colder than normal pattern starts to set up here over the southeastern states, and it kind of expands to the north here, so that by the time we get into the new year, this is all the way out into the early part of January. And here we go. You can envision strong high pressure right here centered here with these above normal conditions in western and central Canada, colder air able to come down in the central and eastern U.S. and setting up this colder than normal pattern here across the southern and eastern states, with that active southern branch of the jet streak. May make for a very interesting weather later next week going into the early part of January. Well, now let's take a look at some teleconnection indices that again support the idea of a pattern change later next week to one that is colder and potentially snowier for the eastern U.S. and maybe even the southern U.S. And these teleconnection indices again support that idea of a change, and also tend to support the idea that that change will be sustained, at least for a period of time going into the month of January. This is the Madden-Julian oscillation that we refer to occasionally here in the wintertime. It's a tropical disturbance that moves kind of on a regular pace across the tropical part of the globe, and its particular location, or what we call phase, usually results in predictable, at least more predictable, temperature and precipitation patterns across the world. In this case, the red represents the forecast of this MJO going out to the latter part of December, and we're starting off right in this region right here, and it rotates in this fashion on this kind of a plot counterclockwise into this area by the end of December. Now, these particular phases or locations of that tropical disturbance, phase 8 and then phase 1 and ultimately phase 2 right down here, these particular phases are actually typically associated with colder conditions in the eastern, southern U.S. And so indeed this particular teleconnection index known as the MJO is certainly supportive of the idea of a pattern change, and one that very well could be sustained going into the month of January. By the way, as this pulls, this particular circle right here is what we call kind of the null phase or neutral phase. When the MJO is inside that circle, and this kind of a plot tends to be weakened and not all that impactful around the world. Well, notice it kind of escapes from that area and strengthens. This is basically telling us that as it pulls away from that inner circle, it is a strengthening signal here. So again, beginning later next week, the 26th, 27th, the MJO is not only in a colder phase here, phase 1 and 2, headed into early January, but a stronger signal as well. Again, supportive of an idea that we change to a colder pattern for the eastern U.S., and it very well could be sustained going into January. Now let's wrap up by taking a quick look at 3 other teleconnection indices. That first one we just looked at dealt with tropical activity around the globe. These next 2, the Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation, we refer to often going into the winter season, they refer to temperature and precipitation patterns across the Arctic region, the North Atlantic. When they drop into negative territory, that generally supports the idea of high latitude blocking up across Canada, for example. And indeed, these 2 indices are in positive territory. However, they are dropping from a peak in positive territory. This is the forecast for the Arctic oscillation as we go through the next couple of weeks in December. This right here, this particular area represents the end of the month going into the new year. Again, AO dropping, at least dropping from higher positive to lower positive and right towards the neutral line as we get into the last part of December. Now we shifted to the NAO, the North Atlantic Oscillation. Same sort of pattern, same sort of trend here. Positive territory, but again, it too drops negative as we get towards the end of the month. So in general, while both positive, these are giving us some signals that indeed they may be dropping towards neutral or perhaps eventually into negative territory, which is supportive of the idea of that upper level ridge setting up over Canada, which again in turn allows for cold air masses to make their way from Canada into the central and eastern U.S. Well, one last teleconnection index known as the Pacific North America pattern. This reflects what's going on out across the eastern Pacific Ocean in terms of temperatures and pressures, and when the PNA is in positive territory, that generally supports the idea of a ridge of high pressure at the surface and aloft over the western part of the U.S., the western part of Canada. Indeed, this has dropped, has pushed into positive territory here. Let's get this right here. And it basically remains in positive territory over the next couple of weeks. A little bit of a downturn towards the end of the month. But again, the AO and NAO are starting to drop as we go through the next couple of weeks, and the PNA stays relatively positive over the next couple of weeks. And most important, probably, that MJO now shifts. It looks like it's all the forecast models tend to shift it into those colder phases of 8, 1, and 2 over the next couple of weeks. So indeed, I think an important pattern change is coming to a colder one for the eastern and southern U.S., likely a snowier one. Certainly some snow threats on the way, I think, for the latter part of next week going into the early part of January. So for the next few hours, we still have this powerhouse storm system to deal with in the mid-Atlantic and northeast U.S. Watch out for 50-mile-per-hour wind gusts on the backside of this storm. That's it for now. For ArcfieldWeather.com, this has been meteorologist Paul Dorian.